Good evening, everyone. I know you've had already a long day with a lot of power sessions, as we call them. As this session is on women, leadership, and high performance, can we have all the men give a big round of cheer, please? Now, let's have the ladies better that. Come on. So we've got a very diverse panel, and not because it's all women and it's fashionable to be having a women panel with diversity and inclusion as all corporates have, but a diverse panel, as you've heard from their experiences and the careers that they have charted for themselves. They have all worked in very diverse industries, very different backgrounds. The one common factor, though, is they're all very successful at what they do. In an era where women empowerment was not a key word, was not a buzzword, I'm sure, when they started out. And I'm not an expert, on women, definitely not on leadership, and not on high performance. I'm going to leave this panel, quite free-flowing, and we want to, use this opportunity to learn from their own experiences on their personal front, how they manage work, life, careers, where they are today, and where they see the future going. I'm going to start first from the left with Ms. Usha Anand Subramaniam, who, as you know, is leading the first women's-only bank in the country and has been a career banker. So Usha, what do you think were the key sort of defining traits in your career, even when you started out or more recently, that got you to where you are?
Good evening, everybody. And so to my co-panelists and Mr. Kumar. Actually, I come from an industry which is a very old industry, but becomes the backbone of the economy. I joined as my biodata was read out in the year 1982, maybe 32 years ago. There's one generation gap. It's a wide gap. And fortunately or unfortunately, I joined as a specialist, being a statistician in the planning stream of the bank. And I come from Bank of Baroda, which had, a keen interest in specializations. In the morning, we had Dr. Khandelwal speaking. He joined as a specialist. So it has been a nursery for specialists to grow. And especially when you join as a specialist, your career is almost finished. Because only when the vacancies arise, you have a career opportunity to move forward. So first 20 years of my career have been one of lull and low, I should say. It all happened very slowly, and in the normal channel, there was no fast track in those days. Today we talk about fast track promotions, which never existed. So I had to be patient to get my turn. But 2004 onwards has been the defining moment, and almost every 2 years I could step up one after the other, the rungs of the ladder, and reach to the top. So you should be wondering why 20 years was lull and the next 10 years was vibrant. The thing is, I got to realize and I learned that talent spotting becomes very important in an organization. I was spotted. I was not only spotted and left there, I was also nurtured. And I was mentored. I was coached. This 10 years that has seen the transformation and the promotions or the career progression happening. And I was mentored by none other than Dr. Khandelwal, who headed the bank. And I almost worked with him for, I think, 5 to 7 years in various capacities. So that became the grooming program for me maybe he was my CLO, he was my boss, he was everything. So that was a key factor in my life that saw to it that how a spotted talent, when nurtured, can blossom better. And moving forward, and then comes, the people change in the organization. I was promoted as general manager. I was the third general manager, woman general manager or a lady general manager in 100 years of the history of the bank. And the first woman to head what we call as the zonal head, geographies that are defined, and you're responsible for the entire operations. And as usual, when you go as the first woman to head a zone, the men wait and watch to see that you fail. And I had that experience, I'm just sharing with you very honestly. And that I was assigned a zone which was half of India. You can imagine the entire South India, the 4 states and the Pondicherry, all this was assigned. And you had to, and that was a zone that was not on the radar of the management. But I had to work, whatever the principles that he said in the morning, many of you would have heard. Accessibility, credibility, and visibility. I took it as my mantra, and of course, hands-on. So I took the problems hands-on, challenges head-on, and heart-on with my people. And that helped me to motivate the team. And the suspense in the whole thing is a zone which was relegated, which was never in the radar of the management, became All India #1, throwing zones like Bombay, Delhi, and all kinds of, the other setups in the organization. The learning part has always been experiential and observational. I believe observing a leader and, then I became the executive director in Punjab National Bank. Now today I'm heading a bank. How useful it is the observational learning, the right pickups that you have, the right way you deal with problems. I think they come in a big way handy to you. And these, I feel, yes, you have to be a people's person always. Because not only that you grow, a leader is one who gives space for others to grow. And that is how many people have grown. And I'm very happy to see many of my colleagues who worked with me in different positions. That is how you nurture. You get nurtured. In turn, you need to nurture a lot of people. So that has been, the various, the steps, I would say, what happened in my career that has brought me here and placed before you to talk today evening.
Great. Anjali, I will take a cue from what Usha said about talent spotting, because you're pretty much in that business now, right? And where do you see this entire paradigm moving? One, you've got regulation, let's say, in terms of number of women directors on boards. On the other hand, you've got this newfound fancy for CEOs and boards and leaders talking about saying, we're a company which believes in diversity, inclusion, we're a company which has X percentage of women employees, etc., etc. So do you think this is more about, just giving lip service to a trend? Or are you seeing corporations in India, since you're obviously interacting with a very wide slew of businesses of different shapes and sizes, what is the perception you're getting on how much of it is really there on the ground?
Great question. How much of it is real and how much of it is regulatory and how much of it is check the box? Can you hear me? I'm not sure.
I think just hold it closer.
Yeah, I think the volume is low. Okay. So I tend to take a somewhat optimistic view of these things. Whether it is regulatory driven, or it is check the box, or it is sincere and truly intended, the simple fact is, it is. And whatever drives it, it's a good journey, it's the beginning of a journey. India is not alone in having a relatively sort of poor record and statistical records on diversity. But it's also important to think about diversity in a more diverse sense. It is not just about gender. It has to be about inclusion of other views, other perspectives. I mean, if you look at North America, they don't think about gender as much when they think about diversity. They actually think about race, ethnicity, orientation, and so on. In India, we are still relatively early in our journey, and so we think about gender. On the other hand, you look around the room, and I don't think we would find a more diverse group anywhere else in the world. I think we grow up in India, in our classrooms, and in our workplaces with a lot of diversity, people from different states, languages, religions, cultures. So I think diversity is quite ingrained. As it comes to women in leadership roles, in board positions and so on, that is a journey. Our current statistics in India, about 7%, 7 point something percent of independent directors are women. So that's not a good statistic at all. But if I compare it to 5 years ago, where it was more like 2.6, then yes, of course, the needle has moved. So I will take an optimistic view.
Right.
There is change, it is happening, and whatever the driver, it is a welcome change.
So you're saying, irrespective of what is causing it, you're seeing the effects coming in slowly and surely, right? So over to you, Apurva. In your recent book, Lady, You're Not a Man, you've written extensively about women and life at the workplace, work-life balance and sort of career for women. What are your views on, let's say, early on when you started on in your career in various media organizations to the current scenario? How do you see it has changed for women at the workplace, the societal context, the professional context?
So I was very fortunate to be part of a sunrise industry in that sense, a newer industry which really started around 20, 25 years ago, which is when I started my career. And as you see with a lot of those type of industries, service industries and media, etc., because of a lack of talent, they started with a more diverse pool to begin with. So we've always had 20 to 30% women entering the workforce, right? And which was not the case with the older industries, manufacturing, etc., etc. So in that sense, I've been fortunate to be part of an industry which has been more diverse to begin with. Having said that, of course, there has been a dramatic change in the last 20 years from the way organizations perceive it. 20 years ago, I think organizations saw diversity as a CSR initiative, right? So if you had 2 women on tokenism, so there was an administrative officer and a secretary, and you felt very happy that you've recruited women. 20 years later, clearly organizations are realizing that diversity leads to profitability. I think everybody's understanding that there is a direct business correlation between diversity and from the organization's point of view, I would say, and I would tend to agree with Anjali, that I'm very optimistic and I've seen the change. I've spoken at nearly 100 organizations in the last 1 year around the book and the diversity theme. And everywhere I realize that organizations want women. Organizations want them to come, to stay, and they're putting in incredible amounts of policies in place, including one organization where I went, where for pregnant women, they're designing special chairs so that, they don't get a backache. I mean, to that extent, there is work happening. However, the problem is not there. The problem is on the other side of the equation. I very strongly believe that it is women, if the numbers are not moving up that dramatically, it is us women who are giving up. We start off, 30% enter the workforce. By the time 4-5 years through, one marriage, one kid, and we are ready to sort of say that, bas, now I'd rather stay at home. And then when I talk to women and, no, you must have had some special benefit, there must have been some special circumstance that helped you get there, some special mentor. You don't know our problems. So to every woman, I say the same thing, that every woman has a lazy husband and an evil mother-in-law. It's, you have to get out of that trap and then move ahead.
My wife will disagree with that completely.
Okay. So
With the exception of
So I think that the mirror has to shift inward, and we have to start asking ourselves many more questions if we want this whole equation to move.
So you're saying the problem is not just about the external environment, but the cocooning of what women have sort of brought upon themselves over decades and decades of societal sort of stigmaism. Whether it is education, whether it is going out and working, maybe late night shifts or working on the shop floor, etc.
Or it's also the choice. Men don't have the choice. We keep on talking about women being stereotyped. Men are also equally stereotyped into being the chief wage earner. A man can't turn around and say, I want to get in touch with my inner self and do pottery and give up his job. A woman can. And because she has the choice in her mind, she does it. And I think that's the problem.
So I think you've hit upon something very good, I think we need to take this discussion towards about men empowerment as well. you know. So why can't men have the choices that women have, right? We should be able to go and say that, listen, darling, why don't you go out and, put in extra 20 hours this week and for the next 6 weeks because, I want to take off and find my inner self. And, I'm going to go to Goa to find my inner self during New Year's. And, I will connect with the real core man inside me. Sundance. Yeah, to Sundance. Yeah. To the Sundance Music Festival. So, how many of you guys think we guys should have that choice? There. So, suddenly we have empowered all the men now. Right? But on that point, I wanted to come back to you, Anjali. You've been with McKinsey and now with Spencer Stuart. You're obviously getting a real pulse of careers for women. What is the change you've seen? So, for example, I've spent some time in the ITES space, and that was an eye-opener 5 years ago to see, throngs of women coming into work on a midnight shift, in a tier 2 city, which for the life of me, I don't think we could have imagined, maybe a decade ago. So maybe that's just one of the examples of the societal change or the acceptance. But what is the larger context you're seeing, in terms of the societal change, in terms of professional avenues for women, and how is that entire ecosystem coming together?
So if I think about careers for women, I'd actually just talk about careers. Because it doesn't need to be careers for men and careers for women. And I think Apurva made a very good point. Actually, nothing prevents men from saying, I actually want to spend more time with my kids. I don't know a single man, friends, family, professional acquaintances, who doesn't want to spend more time with his kids. And despite that, most homes tend to be single-parent homes, where it's the mother who's parenting or mothering. So if we can make the societal shift to co-parenting, I think that will be a big shift, which hasn't happened yet. What is the difference that I have seen? I think there used to be a time when it was, men actually did not have a choice. They still don't have a choice. Society expects you to go to work. It's just not an option. Whereas women have had the choice, they didn't have as much choice earlier. So society expected women to look after their home and kids and stay home. And today there is a bit of a choice. And unfortunately, a lot of young women choose to exercise that choice by staying home versus going to work. No judgment around it, but that is what leads to what we call a leaky pipeline. So at the entry point, you have 30% intake. Why do you only have 7% at the output of that funnel? It's because somewhere along the journey between self-inflicted pressure or choice by women themselves, expectations of society, and sometimes not particularly supportive workplaces. Because workplaces need to create not just policies and processes around maternity, around flexible working, and I'm sure all of us have heard all of those things, but it's really attitudinal change in the peer group that accepts that there will be a few years in a woman's career that she will need more flexibility, and that's okay. And the woman will need to understand that she may not advance as much as her peer, but that's okay because, in a 20, 30-year career, it really doesn't matter. Coming to me, I think I have been extremely fortunate. I grew up in a family where the gender piece never really factored in the choices you made, either academic choices or professional choices. So I studied engineering. We were 15 girls in a class of 450. So you kind of got used to being the zoo creature almost. But that's okay because then I've, like I said, very fortunate to work in organizations like McKinsey, completely meritocratic. It doesn't matter what gender. Everyone works hard. No brownie points for working extra hard. Certainly, lots of loss of brownie points for being a slacker for any reason. Then I joined Spencer Stuart, where I must give credit to the firm. Startup in India, very well-established firm around the world, and they picked sort of a relatively young woman to start up their business. So I think the firm took a risk. I respect the firm for that. And what it has done for me is to recognize that it doesn't really matter. A good person, a good professional is a good professional. It doesn't matter if they're a man or a woman. And sometimes we put on gender-based lenses and create our own set of biases when we don't really need to.
So what you're really saying is, there's no difference, right? I mean, you're a professional, you're out there to perform, you're out there to go out and do your best, right? And
But I just wanted to
absolutely.
supplement what she said. It is a compulsion for the man to go to work and not so for the woman. It is really so. To put it in the other words, the success of a man in the society is determined by his career progression. You know, any woman is proud to say my husband is general manager, or, you know, I don't think, you know, it comes on. So, and the success of a woman is decided by so many factors. Maybe she brings up the best children. Maybe she becomes the best daughter-in-law. She becomes the best daughter, whatever. So we need to change the perception and start looking the success of the woman the career progression and success of the woman as also a benchmark. Because we have always been saying, oh, her children go to Harvard, so she's an excellent mother. And the man is whatever, you know, he progresses, she's proud to say. But I think that there has to be a shift in this, you know, change. It should happen. I think every man should be proud to say my wife is, you know, an executive, or she's an engineer, or whatever. When Anjali was talking about she being one of the few students in the class, I must also share my experience with you. As a student going for the undergraduation course in Chennai, only one college had a subject called geology. I don't know how many of you must have heard. And I wanted to be a geologist. So I applied, I filed my application in the Presidency College, a very famous college. Outright, the application was just removed by the principal and put in the dustbin. Why? Because in the sex I had put F. I've ticked the box F. And they said it is not meant for women. Geology is not meant for women, and no intake will happen. I'm sure after 30, 40 years down the line, they have started it. So that was the time when there were, you know, specifications. Today we have moved out of all that. The way the scientists at the launch of the Mangalyaan, the way they were dancing, the scientific officers, the women, you know, the scientist community of women was dancing. I felt we have moved much forward, but the societal expressions in terms of a woman being looked at as a successful career woman needs to be encouraged, and it needs to come out.
On that point, Usha, question to you. Today, I think, you know, let's say all the people in this room, the organizations that we all work in, you know, the society in Mumbai or Delhi or Bangalore, you know, let's say the tier 1 cities and the A-list corporations you all are all part of. I don't think empowerment is a subject of debate anymore. I think these are organizations where employees, whether men or women, like Anjali said, there's no differentiation. Am I correct? I don't think there's any major differentiation there. So if empowerment is not the question in this certain section of society or, you know, part of the economy, what do you think is really holding women back then? I mean, yes, in maybe tier 3 towns and cities, there's still an issue, you know, in terms of education for the girl child or facilities, or, you know, there are economic pressures where large families who are, you know, not very well to do have to decide, you know, which child has to study further and which one has to sort of start working midway into their scholastic career. But what do you think is holding women back right now at the workplace? So, like Anjali mentioned, we moved from, you know, 2.6% women independent board directors to 7% now. That's been, what, 10 years? 5 years? So, you know, how do you think we would be, you know, moving from 7 to, let's say, 20 or 30? And, you know, what is holding us back? So, women are excelling in every organization, in every, you know, field of life, but why is it not translating into some real numbers?
I think coming on to the board positions, it has been, I would say, yes, we have not been very good as compared to Norway or, the Scandinavian countries especially. But we are much, much better off a so-called highly developed countries that we imagine, that is Japan. In Japan, if you see, the board of directors is 0.9%. The women representatives are 0.9%. It's abysmally low. All the women work on as factory workers, but you will never see a CEO or a senior management position being held by women in Japan. So to that extent, we are much better off. But what happens in the Indian context is initially the woman joined the workforce or joined an office or looked to a career as an economic support to the family. That is how the women have started in India. And today, and there were limited options of education and limited avenues of, career options. That was one kind of a period when it was happening. The next was, and then the large family kind of things. Today it is nucleus families with with 2 children, 1 child syndrome. And many of the women, talented women, even in my own industry, I can speak about public sector banks, people reach a certain level, brilliant women, very quick at, the uptake, very intelligent, bright women. But when it comes to a certain point, they stop. Because as I said, they want to be producing children to IIMs and IITs and Harvards and Stanford. Somewhere, they say it becomes a sacrificial element on the part. The typical Indian woman, the Indian mother, they say, okay, I've come up to this, I'm fine, and my husband is, moving forward. Now it's my time to spend on my children. See that they settle very well in life. And, that kind of a thing, that puts it's kind of a backstop on them, which people should, try to come out, for which they require tremendous family support. That is where, the life partner needs to support. They have to have a lot of understanding on the career progression. That's why when the junior officers, they join my organization, or whichever bank I have been, when I address them, I say, before you develop banking skills, please develop negotiation skills. Negotiation skills with your life partner to say that we will progress in the career. My career is as important as yours. And earlier, if you see in that paradigm of, that era when we just joined for economic, packet economic support, the girls were a BCom, BA, whatever. Today, they have multiple degrees. Everybody comes with an MCA, MBA. And she says MBA marketing, MBA. Those kind of multiple qualifications acquired with hard work. And I don't think that is meant for child rearing. It doesn't require such great skills. So it's for her to negotiate with the partner, have an understanding with the family that she moves forward, and maybe the boardrooms can see much better women walking into it.
Great. So, don't blame the CLO summit if you all have conversations with your husbands and, which are negotiation based. You heard it here, but I'm sure you've heard it before as well, right? Coming to you, Apurva. Like you mentioned, you've spoken at so many fora regarding not just, women issues and women at the workplace, but also, the youth. So, young women and the workforce. Where do you see that panning out right now in terms of, you've spoken to so many people regarding careers, their aspirations, or, B school students, etc. So, the future workforce. Where do you see this whole push and pull sort of resulting into, men wanting, housewives or homemakers and women wanting careers, or what is happening there?
So I think there are 3 parts to this equation if we really want this whole diversity movement upwards. One is, of course, the organization. One is the woman herself, and one is either the life partner with whom one has to negotiate, or men in that relationship. And as I've already said, organizations, I would today give them a 10 out of 10 for the effort that they are putting in ensuring that there is diversity. I think there's a bit of a problem with men, and there is more of a problem with women, I would say. There was more of a problem with women. Focusing on the women piece, I think, we are all talking about the 5%, 2% going up to 5%, going up to 7%. What do we do? The problem is actually not there. The problem is at the middle of the pipeline. So 30% women are entering the workforce. Only 5% are reaching the top. Why? Because at the middle level, there's only 15% left. So the dropout is happening from 30% to 15% at the middle level. And when you have only 15% women, obviously when you are looking for the top position, there is just a limited pool available. And that is happening for various factors. So once you have children, there is this whole guilt thing that women go through. How can I leave my, I have the most vulnerable time of a woman's life is when her kid is two and a half, and when she's getting ready to go to work. Mommy, please don't go to work. And then the kid is crying and they're coming and saying, ma'am, I want to leave my job because I can't bear to see my kid cry every day. And the inherent guilt that women suffer from. The other issue, of course, is the historical baggage that we carry. And all of us have grown up, and history for middle class India is really Bollywood, right? So we've grown up on watching all those suffering Sita kind of women, right? So they're always suffering. So they're suffering because they have evil husbands. They're suffering because they're poor. They're suffering because they're rich and the boyfriend is poor. They only suffer. And I think that Indian women believe that it's cool to suffer. So we like to suffer. So we get up in the morning and then we rush to work and we suffer in the bus, and then we suffer at office because we have a bad boss, and then we go home and the husband says, relax, you've come late and we'll just order out. So say, no, I will make hot chapatis for you so that I can go out to office tomorrow and say how much I suffered because I made hot chapatis at 10 o'clock in the night. So we just like to suffer. And because of all this suffering, sacrifice that Usha talked about is also part of that eternal Indian woman. No? So she sacrifices her career to stay at home and bring up kids. So and there is no research which proves that stay-at-home women have better kids than working women. So I think that's an issue which we'll have to get out of. And third, of course, is men. And as I was sharing with you a little earlier, I spoke at a metro-based MBA institute, and I asked the girls, how many of you want to work? All of them put up their hands. And then I asked the students, the male students, and 90% of them said that they want a non-working wife. This is an MBA student of 2014. So that is the conflict that we will have to resolve. And why are they doing this? Because mostly they have seen non-working mothers. So they have seen that comfort, and that's what they want out of home also. They want the mother who brings them the hot tea and the towel when they go in for their baths to be replicated by the wife. So they're happy to have non-working wives. And how will we ultimately resolve this conflict is the biggest challenge. How will we tell our young boys that it is so much better to have a working wife? And it's only children of working mothers who understand this. So the more, finally it's going to happen over time, the more women work, the more their sons and brothers will grow up to respect this facet of their spouses or sisters.
So essentially what you're saying is going to be a generational change over time, right? We'll have to grow up seeing a certain thing, and then that's going to become the way of life. How many of you have heard of a term called DINK? Pretty common, right? So double income, no kids. So I think if we were to, since you're heading a media organization, I'm sure you can propagate the benefits of being a DINK. Double income, no kids. What's better? Yeah, it is. I'm sure. So I have some friends who were, husband, wife, both are working, and I'm like, guys, right? Vacation when you want to, etc. But Anjali, now let's change gears a little. So very recently, a prominent Indian NRI women CEO made a very strong statement about, work-life balance and women careers, etc. Now, this is a question to all three of you. So I'll start with Anjali. What is your take on that, and what has been your experience? How have you managed it?
So work-life balance is another sort of jargony term. And what is work-life balance? You work and you live. So that's the balance, really. And how much you work and how much you live, I don't think there is a formula for it. And if there is one, that has to be a uniquely individual formula for every person. So that's my take on the work-life balance question. I'm very curious to hear what my co-panelists also have to say. How I've made it work, I think it was just never an option to not work. And when it is not an option to not work, and it comes from within, and you're partner understands it and your family understands it, both your birth family and your marriage family, then I think things just sort of conspire to make it work for you. I do have 2 young children, and my kids haven't seen another way. So once in a while they will say, my son a couple of years ago he said, "Mom, why can't you be class mom?" I said, "Well, I'm happy to be class mom, but you decide whether you'd rather I spend my spare time with you or with your class." And he was very clear, he wants my time with him. Right? So I think these are conversations, discussions, and again, perhaps one is fortunate. I've had extremely supportive parents and extremely supportive in-laws, and a partner who's a real partner. So that hot chapati syndrome, at least I haven't experienced. Haven't had the urge to suffer. And I have seen enough martyrs around. And by the way, I'll share this little anecdote. So when I had my first child, I went back full-time to work at McKinsey, which actually in hindsight was a very daft thing to do because I was working these 20-hour days. I was kind of exhausted all the time, not having fun. Then I had my second child. McKinsey is a very, very supportive employer. And they let me continue with my madness. And I then started having these sort of guilt pangs of, am I doing the right thing? Am I a terrible mother? And how will my children grow up? And they'll be flawed because of my faults and so on. So I did what a good consultant does. I gathered data. I spoke to 15 women. It was not a statistically significant sample, but anecdotal.
So less than 30, and no central limit theorem.
Only 15. Some of whom had just continued plowing through. They were very senior women who had achieved a lot, who had children, families, the works. Some who had done the slow down, speed up, the flexi through their career, but were very successful and very accomplished in a different sort of way. And some who had actually stepped off, completely stepped off in my sort of circle of girlfriends and so on. And what I found was actually quite inspiring to me, and it helped me make some choices. That the happiest women were those who had stayed in. They had crafted solutions that worked for them. They had very few regrets, if any, both personally and professionally. They had crafted a family environment, a social environment, and frankly, even their professional and friend circle were people who were positive and supportive and not folks who were saying, "Oh, you're a terrible wife and mother." The unhappiest ones, the ones who had the most either explicit or somewhere inside that martyrdom resentment, were the ones who had stepped off completely. And 5 years later, you lose your confidence. You can't come back. And these are all women who had started off with double degrees, foreign education. Everyone started off at the same place. But some felt better about themselves than the others. So I'll pause there.
Great.
See, work-life balance is important. At least, I do not know in her line of activity. It becomes important because you are, the accountability levels are very high in a banker and, day in and day out and a lot of things. But one achieves, and I've been very lucky, like she said, I have to say, I had excellent support from the people around me. I must give the credit to my in-laws. When my child was born, I never knew my husband's grandmother steps in voluntarily to stay, and then she said, "It is my duty to take care of him." So that was a big plus in my life. And work-life balance, people always talk for a career woman, only 2 dimensions. You have to be good at office, you have to be good at home. But I have a very different theory. I have a 3rd dimension for a woman. Because we have always been talking about these 2 dimensions. The 3rd dimension is that, as she said, pottery, painting, music, whatever because every woman comes with some kind of a talent which is latent in her. It could be singing, it could be bathroom singing, but you enjoy that. You unwind yourself. You see some freedom in that. So that kind of a 3rd dimension, I think the woman is always, kind of exploring that 3rd dimension. Most of us fail in that. Most of us give it up. But there are a few who get into the 3rd dimension, and it is more than a balance that you achieve. You get re-energized. You get totally, charged up when you are able to spare that. Maybe you would like to read, any of those. Even today, there are some girls who read those Esther Rier, Milson Boone books. They were all of those 30, 40 years ago. But even today, people pick up a book. You love to read that kind of a 100-page, you know what it is, but still the pleasure of reading rejuvenates you. So the third dimension in a woman is always being, the time is being, she just goes around kind of exploring that time for herself. But I would only say that she needs to explore. Maybe somebody's good at poetry, somebody's good at, writing dialogues, somebody's good at, acting. Why not do that? Maybe join a troupe, present yourself. But that is how you realize your inner, your potential or what you are always seeking. You are a good mother, you're a good cook, you may be the best woman on earth, but ultimately something for yourself that makes the work-life balance, very, I would say, delightful. And I have been one finding that because I'm a student of Carnatic music. So I find that time, maybe I listen to music, I practice music, whatever. That half an hour, it's past midnight, but I love to do it. And it's not that you come in on a platform and do a concert, but that kind of a recharging you do for yourself. Beyond everything, as an achiever on your career, achiever on the home front, but something for you that makes a career woman, I feel. The third dimension gives more of, I would say, a sheen to the life.
Great. Apurva.
So I don't think this concept of work-life balance exists any longer with the kind of technological changes, et cetera, and, all of us have jobs which are actually 24/7. So, I run 20 radio stations which are 24/7. I can't say that after 9 o'clock I'll not take any calls if my Coimbatore radio station is caught a fire, right? So I think it's just about merging the two and trying to make the best out of it. And the way to make the best out of it really is to learn to prioritize intelligently. And, my husband's also a CEO. He has a crazy travel schedule. But for us, it is very important to figure out that time to spend together. So we spend half our lives balancing calendars and trying to figure out when each of us will travel. And I'm sure Anjali is going through the same thing. So the intelligent thing to do is to learn to not, first of all, agitate about, I will not take calls after 6 o'clock, or even if it means going for a PTA meeting at 11 o'clock in the morning, so be it. It's required, you have to do it. It's a question of learning to prioritize. And priorities will constantly change. So there will be large parts of your life, of your 30-year career, where career will be the number one priority. There will be some parts where when you're pregnant, your kids are small, your parents are ill, where family takes precedence. That's okay. There are some times now, for example, we are empty nesters right now, my husband and I. So we're enjoying another type of, that third dimension that she's talking about, of trying to explore other things that interest us. So I think importantly, not to agitate about trying to balance. It's a merge. We have to learn to deal with it. And in that merge, just pick up the couple of priorities that are extremely important to you and focus on them.
So I think it's time now to open this to the floor for some questions. Wow. So, great. Do we have a mic there? Or you could take one from here if you don't have. Yeah, we've got an extra one here. Yeah. Thanks.
Or, gender diversity, expanding it to, the broader diversity in Western world. As Anjali says that when she was going up, the entire sets of men wanted to see her fail. So where do we actually go? I mean, there is so much of diversity in the panel itself. So if one has to be correct, the other has to be wrong. So basically my concern is that statement, if it was made in a lighter vein, it's perfectly okay. But if it is a real serious problem, serious observation, then we actually have a serious problem in the society to solve.
Sorry, who would like to respond to that?
He talked about men wanting to fail. He highlighted that. So let me see. It is always. Let me make it very clear. The panel will have its own views. You have to be ready to listen to the panel because it's a personal experience which is honestly put on the table. I could have always said I went and became a success. Everything was fine, hunky dory. But no, there were. When you go as the first woman to head a zone in 100 years in a life of an organization, naturally people look at. Chalo, let's see what. I'm sure because they have never experienced any woman heading a zone as big as this. So there was always a kind of a thing, chalo, she's going to fail. Because they always thought it was a male bastion. So you have to go and break it, which was broken. So you have to silence people. It happens in any organization when the first time these kind of things happen. So, I don't think it's not any contradictory view. It is what I experienced, I shared with you.
Sure.
Because when somebody goes for the first time, and you are breaking into a male bastion, naturally, there is a kind of an excitement. There is a group, there are some men who thought they could be posted, who are eligible along with me, but I got posted because they thought there have never been a woman posted. So it is always a men's turn to head zones, and you go there. It's but natural, and there's nothing wrong about it.
It also happens that several men around want a woman to succeed. Could that way too?
Sure.
See, but
I think one of the things we must just accept when we talk about diversity and inclusion, the whole point is that there will be different points of view. And no one has to be wrong for someone else to be right. There are many shades of rightness. And so all of this can actually be correct and right. And that is the meaning of diversity, is to have different points of view and be able to include them into a dialogue. So I'll just suggest that to you as well. Secondly, I think whenever there is a change in what has been an accepted construct, in this case, I think in Usha's case, who gets to be zonal manager, the first time it happens is a bit of an oddity. But for most of us, and we were talking about this just before we came on to the dais here, when we entered our careers, when we entered the workforce, you kind of felt, okay, maybe you are one of the minority, but if you take away the gender lens and just say it's a minority lens, after a while, minorities become accepted. And today, I don't think any of us thinks about who's in the room and what's the gender proportion when we walk into any kind of meeting. It just is. So I think we are going from the process of becoming to the process of being. But it is a process.
And that Anjali and me possibly didn't bring up issues where we were stereotyped or, there were biases against us. And Usha brought up is not that it didn't happen to us or she hasn't had. She also talked about the great mentors she's had. I think it's also when we are presenting a point of view, it's what we choose to focus on. Okay, so she focused on that point that, men were waiting for her to fail. We focused on some of the good things also, because that's really life. There's good and there's bad, which is not to say that we haven't had biases that we face, but should we just keep on talking about them and making that the big story, or also talk about the great things that's happened to us? I think that's equally important in a panel.
Just to underscore that, see, nothing takes away still from the fact that you may have a 30% entry and a 5% exit. So the leaky pipeline, the loss of throughput is a real issue. And it is not something that we cannot wish it away. It will require real action, real intention. And today I think both intention is there. There truly is integrity of intention. But the action still has to bear fruit. So policy frameworks, process frameworks are being put in place, but attitudinal, societal change has not yet taken root. That's my view.
I would only put it in one line. Any change is resisted. And at that point in timeline, it was a change. So automatically it gets resisted. That's it.
Sure, absolutely. I have a question for all three of you. If you have to start your career all over again, what is that one thing you would do differently and why?
I don't think anyone wants to start over again.
Is there any lessons learned which you would like to tell us?
I'm just joking. Any lessons learned, any tips?
I think I'm quite happy with the way things are. So I really don't want to change anything. But I think initially women tend to be a little more tentative about themselves, have a little, lack of self-confidence. And I think that's possibly when you're 18 and 19, and I never want to be 18 and 19 again, but when you're 18 and 19, you do suffer from, and therefore you fear exploring new things. You know, you go for the very tried and tested kind of thing. So I suppose that's one thing that I would like changed.
I would say one needs to be pretty bold and courageous. I can just give a small anecdotal thing that, something could not be done, or some, loan, whatever, it could not be sanctioned. So my boss said, go and depose before the bureaucrat in the ministry. I said, okay, I'm convinced it cannot be done. I was given an appointment. I went. I said, why, what, everything he asked. I responded, I came away. My general manager told, madam, it requires immense, courage to go and say this. I said, no, I'm convinced. You have got to have the conviction of what you are, communicating. So I came and told my boss. The response would be shocking. He said, Usha, you have said whatever you need to. After all, what can happen? You will not become a chairman of a bank. That is it. So you have to sacrifice, many times, but you have to be, convinced, and you need to carry the conviction with you. And at times of these kind of moments.
So a couple of thoughts come to mind. One is stay positive and surround yourself as much as possible with positive people. It includes finding mentors early in life. They may not know they are your mentors, but you can adopt them as your mentors and learn. Colleagues, recognizing, spotting talent and surrounding yourself with great colleagues who actually are supportive and enablers of your success. Having a great support infrastructure at home and at work. And very importantly, and I was reflecting on what I would like to share, is never lose the learning muscle. So continue to learn, because today it's not about jobs. Careers are quite flexible. You have to be nimble. You have to make the most of the opportunities that you get. And I don't think there is a stereotyped path anymore. So keep learning.
That's a great message on the CLO Summit, on the women's panel, that keep learning. And I think this is a great terminology, the learning muscle. So thank you so much for that. I think we've got time for one last question. There's a gentleman who's been raising his hand here. Can you please pass the mic there? We'll just take one more question, please.
Yeah, again, it's not a question, it's a statement. And I heard it very briefly being mentioned somewhere. Apurva, you were talking about that guilt conscious or that sacrificing women. And I heard the family has to be empowering. I think more than that, the husband has to be very encouraging. Anjali talked about that leaky pipeline, So at that point of time, how much is the husband supportive and encouraging and is very, very important. So I just wanted to reiterate that point.
No, absolutely. I think the most important career decision that one can take is who you will marry. And yeah.
But it is a bit of a luck of the draw as well. So
Not if you don't do the negotiation and the...
But I always say you can choose your partner, but you can never choose your boss.
So on that note, we'll bring this panel to an end. Thank you so much for all the lovely ladies on the panel. A big round of applause, please, for all of them. They've been very candid, and they've shared some real insights from their own personal journeys and professional journeys. Thank you so much.